What's up everyone, welcome to this video. In this video I'm going to be basically walking you through how to use the Flask-JWT-Extended library, or let's call it a Flask extension. So the Flask-JWT-Extended extension is one that allows us to easily work with JWTs when using a Flask application. And the beauty about it is it provides a very easy way for us to simply integrate it within our Flask app, and we can get to use JWTs. If it's your first time here in the word JWT, the word JWT stands for JSON Web Token. Now there are very many ways people pronounce this. People call them JWTs, but I choose to call it a JWT. So JWTs provide a very easy way and a very secure way of transmitting data, but they can also be used to carry out things such as authorization, where you restrict access to only those users that are supposed to access a specific part of your Flask application. Now without further ado, let us get started by basically setting up a simple project. So right here in my VS Code, I have a blank folder open up here, and the only file that's present within this folder is the .m file. So this is going to be an environment variable file where we're going to simply write all our environment variables. Now we do not have a virtual environment yet, so I'll also have to set up one. And to do that, let me delete one of the terminals I have here. What I'm going to do is to come right here, and I'm going to keep it simple. I'm not going to use poetry or any other package manager, but you can feel free to use whatever you may want. So I'll start with Python -m venv and then env, and this will go ahead and simply create a virtual environment within a blank folder. Once the virtual environment has been created, the next thing is going to be to activate the virtual environment with source env. So I'm on Windows, therefore I run scripts, and then I'll call the activate script. So once this is activated, the next thing is going to be for us to basically create a simple Flask app. Now what I'm going to do is to set up an application factory so that we basically use blueprints to create our routes. So I'll create a simple file right here, and I'll call it main.py. So within our main.py, I'm going to basically create a create app function, or our application factory. So to do that, I'll have to first import the Flask class. So I'll say from Flask. We actually have to install Flask. It's not yet resolved within our virtual environment, just like you see right here. So for us to be able to use it, what we shall have to do is to come right here and say pip install Flask. So that has to go ahead and install Flask within our virtual environment. So I'll go ahead and install Flask. So that will collect Flask and install it within our virtual environment. Another thing I'm going to need is going to be python.env to basically help us to read our environment variables, since we have an env file. So I'll come right here and say pip install, and this will be python.env, and actually spelled it wrong. It's actually supposed to be .env. So that will go ahead and install python.env within our virtual environment. So once we have those two, the next thing is going to be for us to set up our application. So I'm just simply going to come right here. So let me try saving this, and maybe I'll have to point this to our Python interpreter of the virtual environment. So now it can actually resolve our Flask. So if we import our Flask, so I'll come and say from Flask. Let me increase this a little bit. So I'll say from Flask, we are actually going to import the Flask app, and then we are going to create a create app function. So I'll say create app is going to be a simple function that is going to create our app instance. So shall create our Flask instance with app is equal to Flask, and then here we shall say that we're going to have our done name. So once we've been able to do that, we shall just simply come right here and say return app. So once this is done, the next thing is going to be for us to configure our app to work with the various extensions that we're going to need. Now the easiest way to write configurations for a Flask app is to basically use a prefixed env. Now, if you haven't worked with this before, is basically go ahead and set up a bunch of configuration values within your .env file, and all you have to do is to come and basically configure your app by saying app.config. So what you're going to do is say app.config, then we shall say .from prefixed env, and what this will do is to load all environment variables from our env file, and then it will go ahead and basically set them up as long as they have a certain prefix. Now, the default prefix is always going to be the Flask prefix. So if we're setting up stuff such as the Flask secret key, we shall just come right here and write the prefix, which is going to be Flask, and then we add an underscore, and then we shall provide the name of that specific key we want to set. So in this case, shall say Flask secret key, and here we can basically add any random string to act as a secret key. Now, the next thing we may want to do is to set up our Flask, let's say debug, and we may keep this to true. So we shall keep it to true, and now we can also set up other things such as our Flask database URI and all that stuff. So for now, let's just have these two. So if we have these two, the next thing we're going to do is to run our app. So to run our app, shall just come right here and say export. So we're going to create an environment variable called our Flask app, and this is going to point to our main.py file. So once we point to our main.py file, the next thing is going to be for us to run our simple app. So to run our simple app, what we're going to do is to say Flask run, and this will be just enough to run our app. And now we can even see that our debug mode is going to be on, meaning that our server is now running, so we are now successful. So the next thing we're going to do is to set up a simple database that's going to allow us to create user accounts so that we can sign up users and register them within our simple application. Now that we've set up our simple server, let's go ahead and create a simple database where we're going to persist our user accounts. So to do that, we're going to be making use of Flask-SQLAlchemy, which is simply an object relational mapper that's going to wrap around the SQLAlchemy ORM. This will be useful as it's going to help us to create classes that help us to easily define our database tables. So what I'll do is to come right here in a new terminal, still within our virtual environment. I'm going to run pip install Flask-SQLAlchemy. So I'll say pip install Flask-SQLAlchemy. I think I've even spelled it wrong. It's going to be Flask-SQLAlchemy. So I'll come right here and add the L, so this will go ahead and install Flask-SQLAlchemy within our virtual environment. So now that SQLAlchemy has been installed, or Flask-SQLAlchemy, the first thing we shall do is to define our database URI. So the database URI is going to point to the specific database that we're going to be using for our simple application. So what we're going to do is to go and define that within our .env file. So to do that, we shall just come right here and say Flask underscore, and then we shall add our SQLAlchemy, and this is actually going to be SQLAlchemy database URI. So let me actually fix this. So it's going to be database URI, and in here we are going to provide our URI. So we're going to keep it simple by using SQLite. So I'll say SQLite, and then I'll basically provide these 3 slashes and then provide the name of the database that we want to be using. So in this case, I'm going to call our database, or let's actually just call it API, or let's say app.db, or let's actually just call it db.sqlite3. So this will be our SQLite3 file, and once I've been able to do that, then I'll also add Flask I'm going to call this Flask-SQLAlchemy echo. So this will be useful as it will allow us to basically go ahead and see the SQL that will be logged every time we are trying to carry out a transaction in our database. So in this case, we shall set that to true. And once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be to initialize Flask-SQLAlchemy to work within our database or within our Flask app. So if we want to do that, the next thing we're going to do is to go within our main.py. So we need to create our SQLAlchemy instance. Now I prefer to create a new file, and I'm going to call this extensions.py. So this is where we shall create multiple instances of our, this is where we're actually going to create an instance of each of the extensions shall be integrating onto our app. So we're going to start with Flask-SQLAlchemy. So I'll say from Flask-SQLAlchemy, we are going to import our SQLAlchemy class. So I'll come right here and say db is going to be equal to our SQLAlchemy instance. So once we've been able to create this instance, now we need to integrate it within our app. So what I'll do is to go within our main.py, and there I'll have to come right here, and all I'll do is to say db. So after the config, I'll just come and say db. So I have to import it first. So to import that, I'll have to say from. So in this case, we're going to import from our extensions. We are simply going to come and import our db instance. And once we've done that, we shall just come right here and say db.init app. So this will basically take in the application instance. So this is basically like initializing our Flask application. So we shall just come and say we shall provide our Flask instance that we've created right here. So now that this is done, let's check on our server. Our server is running right now. So the next thing we're going to do is to create a simple database model for our account. So to do that, I'm going to come and create a new file. And I'm going to call this file models.py. And once we've been able to do that, we are now going to go ahead and define our database model. So this database model is going to be created from our db instance. So shall import it, shall say from extensions, we are going to import our database. And once we've imported that, we are now going to come and say we're going to create a class, and this class is going to be our model class for our users. So we shall call this our user class, and it's going to inherit from db.model. So once we've been able to do that, then we're going to define the different fields, but we can also provide some SQLAlchemy specific attributes such as a table name. So we're going to provide one, and we shall call this our users table. And now here we can go ahead and basically set up our different attributes. So let's start with our ID. So our ID is going to be our unique field that's going to identify each user in our database table. So to begin, we're going to call this our column. And what we're going to do is to save this as a string. So we shall provide the type as db.string. And since this is going to be our primary key, we shall also specify the primary key is going to be equal to true. And once we've been able to do that, then we're also going to provide a default primary key. Now, since we're using a string, we would like to use a string that's going to be unique for every user we shall have within our database table. And to do that, we're going to be making use of UUIDs. So the easiest way we can be able to set one random unique ID is by basically setting a default. So we shall set our default, and then we are going to create a string instance. Now in here, what we're going to do is to call a function that will be responsible for generating these unique IDs. So for us to be able to do that, I'm going to come at the top right here, and I'll say from UUID, we are basically going to come and import our UUID for function. So I'll just come right within our string instance right here, and then what I have to do is to say that we are going to simply call that UUID function. So this will basically create a new UUID. So once we've been able to do that, then let's define other fields. So we're going to have a username, and this username is going to be equal to db.column, and we shall have db.string. So this will also be a string. So we're going to also add some constraints right here, such as the nullable constraint. So we shall say nullable is going to be equal to false. Another thing we're going to do is to provide our email. So we shall say that our email is going to be db.column, and we shall also say db.string. And in this case, we are going to also say that we do not want this to be null. So we shall say nullable is going to be equal to false. So we're also going to set up our password field, and this is going to be our db.column. And in here, we are going to basically set up our db.text. So we shall just basically make this be a text field. So once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to basically create our database tables. So before we create our database tables, we shall also need to basically set up a way for us to get a human readable representation of our database objects. To do that, what we're going to do is to come right here and say def danda repre, and in this case we shall say that we shall have self. Now each time we call an object, it's going to be represented in this string format. So we shall return, and then I'll say f. So in this case, shall say that we are going to have our user, and in this case, shall have self.username. So every time we shall query for our users, they will be returned in this specific form. So now that we've been able to set up this simple database table, or this database model, let us go ahead and create an actual database with that specific table. Now, once we've been able to integrate our app, we're going to get access to the DB object within our Flask CLI utility. Now, the beauty with Flask is it provides for us a Flask CLI that can be able to help us to do different things. So if we go within our terminal right here and say Flask, we can now see that this is going to actually return a lot of options. But as long as you've been able to set a Flask application, so we need to actually set up one, and this can actually be done by saying Flask. We can provide the Flask app, or what we can actually do is to export the Flask apps just like we did in a previous part. So we can say export Flask app being main.py, and then we can basically say Flask shell, and this will give us an interactive console where we can be able to just simply play around with Python and also our Flask application. Now, if we want to access the DB instance, all we have to do is say DB, and that will give us access to the DB instance that we created. So once we've been able to create it, the next thing is going to be for us to basically go ahead and create our database table. So for us to create our database table, the first thing we're going to do is to basically import our models. So we shall say from models, sorry for that. So this is going to be from models. We are going to go ahead and import our user object. So once we've been able to do that, we are now going to call a specific function on our DB instance or our DB object that's going to be responsible for creating these tables in an actual database. So to do that, we shall just come and say db.create underscore all, and once we've called that function, when you press enter, since we set SQLAlchemy equal to true, we're going to be able to see the SQL that will be executed. Now let's go ahead and basically explore the database that we've created. So I'm going to open up my DB browser for SQLite, and I'll open where my simple database is. So I'll leave a link in the description to this specific app that can help you to basically see your database. So I'll navigate to where we have our database. So I'll go to coding, and then basically go to where our database is. So this is our db.sqlite3, and when you open this, you now see that we have our simple user database created for us right here. So for now, we've been able to create our user database. Now that we've set up our user database, let's go ahead and register users within our app. So for now, we've been able to basically bring our server up and also set up a simple database. So the next thing we're going to do is to set up an endpoint or an API endpoint that's going to be responsible for helping us to be able to register new user accounts. So to do that, what I'm going to do is to bring down our terminal. So I'll close it for now, and I'm going to create a new file. So you can feel free to create a package, but I'm going to do all the authentication logic within one specific module or file. So I'll call this auth.py, and within auth.py we are going to go ahead and create a blueprint. So think of a blueprint as a collection of endpoints that are responsible for something. Now the Flask blueprint class allows us to create these blueprints, and this can help us to be able to create routes and basically define them to be carrying out related functionality. And this is basically useful when you go ahead and create a large project, as it's going to help you to make it more modular and have a certain structure. So to begin, what we're going to do is to import the blueprint class. So I'll come and say from Flask, we are going to go ahead and import our blueprint. So once we've imported blueprint, we are going to create our auth blueprint. So we shall call this our auth blueprint. And once we've created our auth blueprint, we are going to simply come create our blueprint, and we shall have to provide for it a name. Now I'll call my blueprint auth, and after calling it auth, I'm going to provide our import name. So just going to provide the standard name object. So once we've been able to provide that, you can provide things such as the static folder and the template folder, but we're going to leave this at this point for now. So let's go ahead and basically create our endpoint. So I'm going to come right here, and all I have to do is to say at auth blueprint dot. Now in this case, I have to call an HTTP method. You can call any of these methods just like you see right here, but what we're interested in is basically calling an HTTP method. Now you can call get, you can call post and all that stuff, but what we need now is going to be the post method. And now we have to define the URL or the rule that we want to access when we want to register a user. So I'll define our URL as the register URL. So this is going to actually be register. And once we have been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to basically go ahead and define our handler function. So every time we define a route, we have to define a function that's going to handle what shall happen when you visit that specific endpoint. Now in this case, we're going to come and say def, and in this case we shall say register, and in this case we shall say register user account or register user, call it whatever you want. And for now, let's just return a simple message. So shall just come and say return. And in this case, what we shall do is to basically return a simple JSON response. Now to return a JSON response, we are going to import JSONify, which is a function that's going to help us to return a JSON response. So I'll come at the top right here and say from Flask import JSONify, and then I'll come right here and say return JSONify. So I'll go ahead and provide our dictionary. Now this is going to have a message of, let's say, user created. So we have not yet handled the logic for creating a user, but all we're going to do is to just return this message of user created. I'm going to go ahead and save it, and once I save, I'm going to have to register this blueprint onto our main app. So I'll head over to main.py, and the first thing I'm going to do is to import our blueprint. So I'll come and say from auth, we are going to go ahead and import our auth blueprint. And once I've imported our auth blueprint, the next thing is going to be to basically go ahead and register that blueprint. Now I'm going to do that, so I'll just come and add a comment here. So this is going to be initialize. So this will be for initializing apps, or let's say extensions. And then right here we shall basically say that we shall be registering our blueprint. So in this case we're going to register our blueprint. So just come right here and say register blueprint. And once I've been able to do that, the next thing is going to be to register our auth blueprint. So to do that, we shall just come and call our app instance, and then I'll say dot register blueprint, and then we shall have to register the blueprint. So our blueprint in this case is going to be our auth blueprint, but we can define other properties on this auth blueprint, such as the URL prefix, which is going to be the URL on which we can access all the routes that belong to that specific blueprint. I'm just going to come and say URL prefix, and in this case this is going to be /auth, so that each time we want to access an authentication URL, we actually have to say /auth/login or /auth/signup or whatever. So once we've been able to do that, the next thing is going to be for us to go ahead and test our endpoint. So hope our server is running. So if we come to our server, it's running. Now I'm going to be using Postman. You can feel free to use any other tools such as Insomnia or even old school Cal. So what I'll do is to come right here and open my Postman app, and within my Postman I'm going to go ahead and create a new request, and then I'll basically create that request. So I even have a collection right here that's called JWT Flask. So within this collection, I'm just going to add a new request, and let me make this full screen. So I create a new request, I'll give it a name. So let's say this is going to be specific to creating a new user. So I'll press enter, and after doing this, then we shall make a request to our root URL, which is localhost 5000. Now come right here and basically create the request. So I'll say localhost 5000, and then I'll go to the /auth prefix, and then I'll try to access the register URL. So when you access this with a post request, all we're going to see is our message of user created successfully. Now keep in mind that our user has not yet been created. So one thing we can do is to now write the logic that's responsible for creating our user. So to begin, what I'm going to do is to head over right where we have our user model. And I'm going to define some functions that are going to be necessary for creating a new user. So the first function we're going to create is one for basically creating or basically generating a password hash for our user. Now lucky for us, Flask comes with most of its tools built around Workzug, which is basically a set of tools that allow development of WSGI servers, or what some people call WSGI servers. So what I'll do is to come right here at the top, and I'll access the security module as provided by Workzug, and then we shall be able to hash our passwords easily. So I'll come right here and say from Workzug.security, we are going to import our generate password hash function. Now I'm going to define a method right here, and this is going to be responsible for generating a password for our user. So I'll call this method def generate, and in this case I'll call it generate password, and this will take in self, and it will basically take in a password as well. So shall have a password. So once we have this, then let's actually just call this set password. For simplicity, I'll call this set password. So Once you have it as set password, now what you want to do is to basically return the password for that specific object. So what shall say is self.password is going to be equal to the result of generating the password hash for that specific provided password. And that will be just enough to set the password for that specific user object. Now another thing we may want to do is to check if our password is valid. Now this will be useful when we are logging in. So I'll import one more method or one more function from this module, and that's going to be our check password hash. So this is going to work in a way that's going to check a provided password and compare it with a saved password hash, and then return true or false depending on whether these two actually match. So to do that, I'll just come and say def check password, and this is going to take in self, and it will also take in the password hash. So in this case, we shall actually take in the password. So what we need here is to just return the result of checking for the password. So we shall just call our check password function or check password hash function, and then provide the password. So in this case shall be self.password, and then we shall also take in the provided password. So shall provide our password. So once we've been able to do this, now let's also write one more method that's going to be basically helping us to check if our user exists. So what we're going to do is to just simply query for our user. So to do that, I'll just come and say def, and I'll call this get user by ID. So it's actually not going to be get user by ID, but let's say we're going to get a user by their username. So I'll just come and say user by their username. And this is going to actually be a class method. So I'll have to decorate this method with that class method. And once I've been able to do that, now we also need to have a username. And when we have this username, we are now going to query for that specific class. So one thing we forgot is, well, defining a class method, we have to first of all provide the class that we want to provide. So we shall say class and then provide the username. And once we've been able to do that, we shall just come and say return. And here what we want to do is to say class dot query. So we're going to be using the query object, and we shall call the method of filter by, so in this case we want to filter by, we want to get that object with a username that's equal to the provided username. So we shall say username and then dot first, and this will be enough for us to basically be able to get our user with that username. So once we've been able to define this, let's go ahead and use it to basically create a new user. Now one thing we can also do is to define a method for saving our user. So that's going to be as easy as basically coming and define a save method. So shall just come and say def save, and this will take in self. And what we're going to do right here is to basically go ahead and save our user. So we shall use our db object. So we can come and say db dot session. So this will be adding it to the session. So we shall say db dot session dot add, and then we shall add self, which is the current user object, and then db dot session dot commit, and that will be saving our object to the database. We can also define one for deleting, so it's going to be the same thing. So just basically copy this. It will only change by basically deleting. So if we basically come and change this, so it's going to be def delete, and what we shall have here is going to be basically deleting the object, just like you see right here. So once we've been able to set this up, now the next thing is going to be for us to go ahead and create our new user. So to create our new user, what we're going to do is to head over to our auth.py, and the first thing we shall have to do is to get the data from the request, or the data that actually comes when a user makes a request to our endpoint. So the way we can access that is by accessing our request object, and the request object is provided to us by Flask, so we shall have to import it. So I'll just come right here and say from Flask import our request object. So once I've been able to import the request object, now come right here and access our data. So I'll say data is going to be equal to request dot get, and in this case shall get our JSON. So once we've been able to get our JSON, the next thing is going to be for us to basically get a user object with the username as provided from the JSON. So to do that, I'll just come at the top right here and import our user model. So I'll just come and say from models, we are going to import our user model. And once we've been able to do that, I'll just come right at the bottom right here and say that we're going to check for our user, and our user is going to be equal to user. So since we defined our method for getting a user by their username, we can just say user.get user by username, and then we shall have to provide the username. So in this case, I'll just come and say that we shall check for the username. I want to check for the username that's equal to what we get from our data. So in this case, shall say data.get username. So this will return our user. So the next thing is going to be to check if this user actually exists, and we shall also be able to raise an error in case this user exists. So to do that, we shall just come and say if user is not none. So actually, let's say if user is not none, that's if the user is not yet existing, then we shall pass this for now, and else. So in this case, that's if the user actually exists, then we want to actually raise an error right here. So to do that, what we shall do is to just come right here and return an error. So in this case, we can say return JSONify, and we can return an error. So let's say error, and in this case we shall say user already exists. So that will actually catch this error. So once we want to only return this response in case we've been able to create a new user. So I'll cut this and then I'll basically paste it right down here. So if user is not none, then we are going to be able to create a new user. So if user is not none, that's actually when the user exists. I don't know why I'm confusing this. So what happens is if the user is none, that's when you're actually going to return this message of our user already existing. And in case the user is not none, that's when the user is not none, that's when the user does not exist. That's actually when you're going to go ahead and create a new user. So to create a new user, we're going to come and create a new user object. So I'll create a new user, and this new user is going to be a user. So this user will have the different properties or the different attributes. Now in this case, we shall have our username, and our username is going to be equal to data.get, and in this case we shall provide our username. So we shall say username, and the next thing we shall have to provide is going to be our email. So we shall say that our email is going to be equal to data.get, and in this case we shall provide our email. So for the password, we are going to need to provide our password just like we defined right here. So to set our password, what we're going to do is to come right here and say new user dot set password, and then in here we're going to provide our password. So our password is going to be equal to what we get from the data. So we shall say data.get, and in this case shall provide our password. So this will be enough to hash our password. And just in case we need to save the user, we shall just come right here and say new user dot save, and this will be able to save our user. So let's go ahead and test our endpoint. So to be honest, what we've done is to basically write simple logic for creating a user, but you can implement this in a way that you want. So what we're going to do is to go right within our postman, and in our postman we are actually going to send this request with some data. So if we try to send this request, we now see that we have unsupported media types. We need to basically send one that's application/JSON. So to do that, we're going to go to our body, and within our body, what we're going to do is to basically set our body to send raw JSON. So we're going to send our body to raw JSON, and for us to achieve that, I'm just going to come and change these things. I'm actually going to set this to be in a vertical format so that the request is here and the response is here. So what I'll do is to come right here and create a new JSON object. So shall have our username, and our username is going to be John Doe, let's say 123. So shall have our email. So our email in this case is going to be equal to John Doe 1234 at, let's say, gmail.com. And then we can have our password. So let's have a test password. So just going to set up a test password, and this test password is going to be our test pass 123. So if we set this up and we try to make this request, when we send this, we now see that our user has been created. However, we see that the response that's being returned is a 200 status code, and we want to actually return the right response for creating a resource. So shall have to change a few things. So in here, what we're going to do is to basically add one for forbidden, showing that we do not allow creating a user who is existing. And here what we need to throw is a 201 status code. So if we try to create a user, so if I try to create a user, we see that 403 forbidden and our user already exists. However, when you go back to creating a new user, so I'll try to maybe change this to from John to Jen. So what I'll do is to go ahead and change this name from John to, let's say, it's actually going to be from John, and we're going to have John. So I'll change this to Jen, and I'll also change this to Jen. And if I try to make this request again, shall see that our user has been created and a 201 status code has been created. So at this point, we've been able to create our user accounts. At this point, we've been able to create a user account, and we've also been able to handle what happens when a user account is not created or when an account actually exists. Now, the next thing we're going to do is to implement an endpoint that's going to allow us to log in or to create a session. So when using JWT authentication, we are normally provided with what is called a JWT. Now, this can be an access token that's going to allow us to access other routes of our endpoint that need us to be having some sort of like access control to get to them. Now, this is where Flask-JWT comes in. So Flask-JWT is that extension that's going to allow us to carry out this functionality. So to begin, we're going to begin by installing our Flask-JWT Extended. So I'm going to head over to VS Code, and the first thing I have to do is to go within my terminal. So I'll make sure that I'm inside my virtual environment, and what I have to do is to say pip install, and in this case I'm going to install Flask-JWT Extended. And once this is installed, the next thing will be to freeze it to our requirements.txt file. And also seem like I already installed it, because I actually set this up in the previous video. So when we have this within our virtual environment, then the next thing is going to be to set it up to work within our app. So the first thing is going to be to basically configure it to work with our application. So to do that, we're going to head over to our .env file, and we're going to add one really important environment variable, and that's going to be our secret key, or our JWT secret key. Now the JWT secret key is going to be the key that's going to allow us to create a JWT. So what normally happens is when you create a JWT, you sign it with a secret key that's going to be used to basically be able to work with a JWT, just like when you're transmitting some information within that JWT. So the issue of the JWT will hide some sort of information within the JWT, and then the user who that JWT is being sent to will have to have the secret key for them to be able to know what's inside the JWT. So what we're going to do is to set this up. So I'm going to be using secrets, which is a Python inbuilt module for creating random secret strings. So I'll come at the terminal right here and say Python, and inside here I'm going to import secrets. So let me actually make this secrets, and what I'm going to do is to say secrets.token hex, and let me say I want to provide 12, and this is going to create a 12-byte. I don't know if it's actually bytes, but it's going to create this unique hexadecimal string. So what I'll do is to copy it, and what I'll do is to come right in here and say Flask. So this is actually going to be Flask, and then underscore. So in this case, we are going to call this our JWT secret key. So once we've been able to do that, I'll say equals, and then I have to provide the JWT secret key. So it's going to be this unique hexadecimal string right here. So once we've been able to do that, I'm going to Ctrl Z to get out of our terminal, and I'm going to clean up my terminal. So the next thing is going to be for us to initialize it within our app. So we're going to do the same thing we did for Flask-SQLAlchemy. So basically what Flask-JWT-Extended will provide for us is going to be a class called a JWT Manager class. And when we are using Flask-JWT-Extended, we shall have to basically create an instance of this JWT Manager class and then initialize it within our app, or initialize it to work with our app. So we're going to begin by importing it. So I'll come right here and say from Flask. So this will be from Flask JWT Extended. We are going to import our JWT Manager class, and once we've been able to import it, we're going to create an instance for it. So I'll come right down here and say the our JWT object is going to be equal to an instance to our JWT Manager class. And once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to basically integrate this or initialize it within our app. So what I'm going to do is head over to our main.py. So we're going to search for our main.py, and within main.py we are going to import from our extensions the JWT object. So we're going to come and initialize it within our app. So shall just come and say JWT dot, so it's actually going to be JWT.init, and in this case we shall have app, and then we shall have provide our app instance. So once we've been able to do this, then the next thing is going to be for us to implement our endpoint for logging in for creating our tokens. So to do that, I'm going to head over to our authentication module right here. And what I have to do is to use our blueprint to create that specific method. So I'll come down here, and all I have to do is to say @auth blueprint dot, in this case shall call this post. So this is going to be a post method, and it's the one that's going to be responsible for basically creating our token pairs. So in this case we are going to call this, let's say create or create /token, or feel free to call it, let's actually just call it login. So when you call this login, what you're going to have is the handler function that's going to help us to log in our user. So we shall basically come right here and say login user. So what we expect here is to return a JWT pair. So this JWT pair is going to be signed, or is going to be having the identity of that user for whom that token has been basically provided for. So what happens is, when you provide your credentials of your username and password, or your email and password, what shall happen is we shall have to check if the user exists, and if the user exists, we shall have to then issue them a token pair. So a token pair is going to consist of an access token as well as a refresh token. So the access token is that will be specific to helping the user to access those protected endpoints, and the refresh token is going to be for security purposes. Now, the refresh token is going to allow the user to gain their access when their access token has expired. So let's look at how we can set this up. The first thing we're going to do is to basically check if our user exists, and if our user exists, we are going to also have to check if their password actually matches the password that they provided, or the password hash that's actually stored in our database. So to do that, we are going to first of all come right here, and what we're going to do is to basically get the data that's going to come from this request. We shall say that our data is going to be equal to request.get_JSON. And once we've been able to do that, then we're going to get our different credentials. So we shall get the username as well as a password for that user. Now, we're going to go ahead and first of all query for the user if the user actually exists. So to do that, we're going to say user is going to be equal to user dot, in this case, we shall basically use this specific method that we called user.getByUsername. So what this will take in is going to be our username. So we can say that our username is going to be equal to what we shall get from our data as our username. So we're going to say data.get, and in this case, we shall provide our username. So once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be to basically check if our user exists. So we shall say if user, so that's if the user exists, and let's say we also want to check if that password actually matches the password hash that's in the database. So we shall say if user, and so we can say if user, and in this case we want to actually say user dot check password. So in this case, we actually, I don't know if we actually implemented that specific field. So that's actually going to be, let's go back to our models.py and see. So within our models.py, we actually created that method and called it check password. So if we come right here and call the check password method, so in here, what we shall have to do is to provide our password. So we're going to say password, and our password is actually going to be our data.get, and we shall have to provide our password. So in this case, we shall say that we shall provide our password, just like you see right here. So once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to basically provide the JWT pair. Now there are two functions, or basically functions, that are provided by Flask-JWT-Extended that are going to help us to be able to do that. So we're going to go ahead and import them. So I'll go at the top right here, and all I have to do is to say from Flask-JWT-Extended, we are going to import our create access token function and our create refresh token function. Now this is what our token pair is going to be. It's going to be just a dictionary containing our access token as well as our refresh token. But what we also want to do is to provide an identity to our access token. Think of it as just hiding the information of the current user within our specific JWTs. So we're going to come right here, and what we're going to do is to basically go ahead and return a response. So in this case, we're going to say return JSONify, and in this case, we shall provide our dictionary, and this dictionary is going to have our tokens. So we can actually just return a token pair, or feel free to call it token or any other thing, or let's actually provide it in this message. So we can provide a message for logged in successfully. So in this case, you can say logged in, and then we shall also have to provide the JWT pair. So what I'm going to do is to basically push this to a new line. So I'll just come right here. Let me actually make this be a little bit more organized. So our message is going to be logged in, and we shall have our token pair. So in this case, we shall have our tokens, and in this case, we shall have basically an a dictionary containing both the access and the refresh token. Now in this case, we are going to say access, and in this case we shall basically provide our access token. So let's say access token, and then we're also going to have our refresh, and in this case our refresh token is going to be our refresh token. So once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to create these two tokens. So what I'll do is to come right here and basically call or create these two variables. This is actually access token. So we shall just come right here and say that our access token is going to be equal to a call to the create access token function, and we shall have to provide the identity right here. So the identity is going to be basically the identity of this token, or the data that we shall have to pass within this JWT. We can also add additional claims. So additional claims can be in a JSON serializable format, or the information, the specific information that you may want to hide within that specific JWT. So we shall just come right in here and say that our identity is going to be the username of that specific user. So we shall just basically come right here and say that our identity is going to be user.username. So that's going to create our access token. The next thing is going to be to basically create our refresh token. So shall just come right here and say refresh token is going to be equal to a call to the create refresh token function, and this will also have the identity as the identity of our user. So in this case, shall just come right here and say that we shall have our user.username. So once we've been able to do that, I'll go ahead and save. So let's also return a status code right here after creating our user. So just come and say comma, and then this will return a 200 status code. So we also need to handle that scenario in which we have not basically been able to log in. So if we try to return a response, so in this case I'll just come right here and say return JSONify, and in this case I'll have to say error. So shall just basically say that invalid, so let's just say actually invalid username or password, and in this case we shall basically raise an error. So let's say a 400 bad request error. So let's try to test this out. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and basically access that endpoint on our /auth/login. So if I go to Postman right here, I'm going to create a new request, and this request is going to be for creating the JWT pair. So I'm going to say create JWT pair. So once I've been able to do that, I'm going to come right here, and all I have to do is to say that this is going to be a post method. So I'll create this. So it should be /localhost5000/auth/login. So just come right here and say localhost. Sorry for this. So this will be localhost /5000/auth and then /login. So once you have our endpoint right here, we are now going to go ahead and basically be able to create our access token. So to do that, we're just simply going to come right here and go to our body. So I'll go to body, and then I'll set it to be row In this case, shall set it to be JSON. So shall provide our credentials. Let me actually copy what we have here. So I'll just copy this object and then provide it right here. So shall have this except for the email. So in this case, shall have our username and password. And when we send, shall now have page not found. I don't know why this is not found. Let me actually see. We called it login. So I think it doesn't require the /. Let me just check this out. So if I send, we're now going to see that's going to return our JWT pair. So we shall have the access token as well as the refresh token being returned right now. So let's also try a scenario in which we have a user who doesn't exist. So let me say I added a 4 onto our username. So if I send this, shall now see our error of 400 bad requests, and then our error is going to be invalid username or password. So at this point, we've been able to generate our JWT tokens. Now that we've looked at how we can provide access to our users by providing for them a JWT pair, let's go ahead and try to protect routes that need to only be accessed when a user has a JWT pair. So to do that, what we're going to do is to implement some sort of endpoint that is going to be carrying out something, and then we shall look at how we can protect it and how we are also going to be able to access it so that we can be able to get the resources that are returned by that endpoint. So we're going to go back to our code right here, and all we have to do is to basically create a simple API endpoint. Now what I'm going to do is to create another module right here, and I'm going to call this our users.py, and within our users.py we're going to create a blueprint. So this is going to be responsible for carrying out user related activities. So in here, what I'm going to do is to start by importing the blueprint class from Flask. So I'll say from Flask, which is actually from Flask, we are going to import our blueprint class. And once we've imported it, we're going to now create our user blueprint. It's actually going to be our blueprint, which is equal to blueprint. And in this case, we shall have to provide the name. Now I'm going to give this a name of users. And after giving it the name of users, we shall have to provide our import name, which is going to be our Danda name object. So once we've been able to do that, now let's just create an endpoint that's going to return a paginated list of users, or of all the users that we actually have within our database. So to do that, what I'm going to do is to come right here, and all I have to do is to use our users blueprint to basically define an HTTP method. So this is going to be a get method, and what I'll do here is to basically go ahead and provide our URL rule. So in this case, we are going to say that this is going to be users. So let's actually just say all, and this will basically return all users. So I'll define this handler function as get all users, and this is simply going to return a paginated list of users. So let's go ahead and try to implement this. So the first thing we're going to do is to go ahead and first of all access our user models. So I'm going to go right here at the top and import our user models from models. So I'll say from models import user. And once I've been able to do that, we're going to now query for our users. So for us to return a paginated list of users, we shall have to make use of the SQLAlchemy ORM to do that. So the way we basically return paginated lists or paginated queries is by simply, so we're going to create a variable called users, and we're going to use our user model. So we're going to say user.query. I'm just using the legacy query API. So in this case, what we can do is to say user.query, and then we can call the paginate method. And in the paginate method, we require two things. We require the page. So I'm just going to call that the page. So the page is going to be the specific selection of elements depending on the page number we have provided. So the page is simply going to be the page number, and then we're also going to have another argument called a page, which is going to describe the number of items that are going to be returned per page, and we're going to look at how that works. So I'll also have to create another variable, and I'll call it per page. So once we've been able to do that, the next thing is going to be for us to create these two variables. Now expect that if we want to return these as paginated lists, what you have to do is to provide these as query parameters. So to do that, we shall have to access our request object that Flask provides for us. So I'll come at the top right here, and after importing Blueprint, we shall also import our request object. So once we've imported our request object, we're going to now access our query params for our page as well as our per page. Now what I'm going to do is to come at the top right here, and all I have to come and say is, so we're going to start with our page, and our page is going to be a result of getting our request tags. So these are going to be the query parameters that are returned with the request. So in this case, we shall say request.ags, which will be a dictionary. And in this case, we want to access the specific key of our page. Now, the beauty about using that .get method on dictionaries is that it allows you to be able to get an item value, or basically get a value using a key, but in case that does not exist, then you can also go ahead and provide a default. Now just in case we have not provided a page, we shall have to provide a default page. So in this case, I'll just come right in here and add one more argument, so that's going to be our default, and in this case shall say that our default is going to be equal to 1. So once we've been able to do that, the next thing is going to be to also define the type of that specific query parameter that you actually want in this case. So what we're going to get in this case is going to be our int. So we're going to define its type as type, and in this case shall say that the type is going to be of type int. So once we've been able to do that, we're going to do the same thing for our per page. So I'll just come right here and copy what we have here. So I'll basically go ahead and provide it down here, but we're going to basically change this to per page. So this is actually going to be per page, and we shall also have it being per page. So what will happen is we shall get per page as an integer, and also the default per page will be, let's actually just say 3 items per page. So once we've been able to do this, now we've been able to get our result of users right here. The next thing for us to do is going to be to serialize this list or this object into a type that actually the front-end application or the front-end client is going to be understand. As we know that these front-end clients usually get this data as JSON, then we shall have to look for a way in which we're going to convert this dictionary that's returned as our user object into valid JSON. So we're going to be using Marshmallow, but you can feel free to use other tools such as Pydantic for that. To keep things simple, I'm just going to use Marshmallow. So what I'm going to do is to install Marshmallow. So I'll go in my terminal right here and say pip install Marshmallow, and this is going to go ahead and collect Marshmallow and install it within our virtual environment. I'll also go ahead and freeze that to our requirements, so txt, so that we actually update it. So once that is done, I'm going to basically go back right here. I'm going to create a new file, and this new file is going to be our schemas.py. So schemas.py is simply where we're going to write our Marshmallow schemas that are going to be responsible for serializing objects and returning them in formats that are understandable by JavaScript clients. But this can also be the other way around. You can be actually validating data that's coming from the request. So to start, what we're going to do is to import some things from Marshmallow. So we shall say from Marshmallow, we are going to import our fields, and we shall also import the schema class, as this is going to allow us to create a schema. So what we shall do is to come right here and create the class. So we are going to call this our user schema class, and this will inherit from our schema class. And once we've been able to do that, then we are going to define the fields just like we want them to be returned. Now, if we go back to our models.py, where we actually define the database structure, the fields that we have are going to be our ID, our username, our email, as well as our password. Now, what I can do is to copy them right here, and all I have to do is to come within our schemas and provide those fields. But for now, they're not actually going to be SQLAlchemy objects, so I'll have to get rid of this. So I'll start with the ID, and this is going to be a string field. So just going to come right here and say fields.string. You've got quite a lot of things right here that you can also add, just to add some validation onto the ID. I'm going to keep it simple for now. Another thing we have is the username, so I'll basically do the same thing here. I will change these from db columns to fields.string, and basically since they are of type string, and then I'll remove the password because we do not want to return the password hash as it is from the database. So now that we have our schema, let's use this schema to return our list of users. So I'll go to users.py and I'll import our schema. So down here I'll say from schemas, we are going to go ahead and import our user schema. And once we've imported our user schema, we're going to go down here, and what we shall do is to basically create our variable called result. Now this will be our paginated list of users, what we're actually going to return in our API. So we shall just come right here and say that our result is going to be a result of creating a user schema object, and then calling that .dump method. And here we shall expect an object which is going to be our pagination object, which we have created right here, as well as one important argument which is going to basically make that a list of users. So we're going to come right here and say that many is going to be equal to true. So what we're going to do is also go ahead and return a JSON response in case we've successfully carried out this request. So to do that, what we shall say is return JSONify. So we need to actually go ahead and import JSONify. I'll go at the top, and then after importing Flask, I'm also going to go ahead and import JSONify. So I'll come down here, and all I have to do is to provide what we want to return as our JSON response. So this is going to have our users. So I'll just come right here and say our users are going to be the result, and then we can provide some other things such as, let's say, the previous page and the other pages, or let's say the next page, but I'm going to leave that out for now. Another thing is going to be to return our simple status code. So this is going to be a 200 status code, and hoping that our server is running, which it is, we are now going to go ahead and carry out this request. So I'll enlarge this a bit, and when you head over to our Postman, I'm going to create a new request, and I'm going to call this get all users. So this is actually going to be, we haven't actually registered this on our app instance. So for us to be able to do that, I'll head over to main.py, and within main.py, I'll have to import our user blueprint. So I'll say from users, we are going to import our user blueprint, and then we shall have to register that. So I'll come right here and say app.register blueprint. And in this case, we're going to register our user blueprint. We shall also define our user prefix as being equal to our /users. So if I save and head over to our Postman right here, so I can provide our URL as localhost 5000 and then /users/all, and this will be able to work. So it seems like it's not working, so let's go ahead and see. So this is /users and then /all /users/all. I don't know why it's not working. So this is Okay, so after debugging, you realize that we had actually made a mistake when defining the URL prefix. It's actually supposed to be the URL prefix. So now if we go back to our Postman right here and send, we're now going to see that this is going to return our paginated list of users. If we try to provide things such as, let's say, our page, so in this case, if we say page is going to be equal to 2, so if we say page is equal to 2, it's actually going to be the page. If we send, we shall now see that this is going to return page number 2. If we say page 2 and let's say page 1, and let's say and per page is going to be equal to 5, so this will be able to return 5 items on our first page, and it's actually working just like the way it is. So for now, we've been able to basically go ahead and create our endpoint, but we need to protect it so that we only access it when we have a JWT. So lucky for us, Flask-JWT Extended provides for us the JWT required decorator that we just add on to our handler functions for requests, and they'll be able to protect our endpoint. So let's look at how we can do that. So if I head over to our VS Code, I'm going to go back to our users.py, and I have to first import the JWT required decorator. So to do that, what I'll do is to go at the top right here and say from Flask-JWT Extended, we are going to go ahead and import our JWT required function. So once we've imported that, we now just have to come and decorate that specific handler that want to only access when we have a valid JWT. So in this case, we shall just come right here and say at JWT required, and then basically go ahead and call that specific decorator, and this will be able to protect our endpoint. So if we go back to our Postman right here and we send, shall now see an error of unauthorized, so we are not authorized to access this endpoint. We only have to access it when we have a JWT provided. So if we go ahead and provide a JWT, I'll head over to where we create our JWT pair. We try to log in once again. We shall access an access token. Now this is what we shall need to get access to the endpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it. And after copying it, I'm going to go where I will get all the users, head over to the authorization header. We can actually do authorization right here. So you can basically provide your authorization type here. You can say JWT bearer token. So you can say that we are using bearer, and then you can provide the token right here. So when you place the token right here and we send, we shall now see that we can be able to access our paginated list of objects. You can also be able to set that up in your headers. So the way you do that is by basically coming where you have your headers. You can set up your authorization. So the key is going to be the authorization, and the value of that will be bearer, and then the token that you want to use to access the endpoint. So if we send, you're now going to be able to access that specific endpoint. So for now, we've been able to protect our route so that we only access it when we have a valid JWT. At this point, we've been able to look at how we can access a route only when we have provided valid JWT. Now, at this point, we do not have any error handlers for the different things that may occur, or for the different scenarios in which may go wrong when providing our tokens. Now, there may be scenarios in which you may provide an invalid token, or where you have a missing token, or where you actually even provide an expired token, because these JWTs are actually short-lived tokens. So we're going to look at how we can be able to implement those scenarios. Now, lucky for us, Flask-JWT Extended provides a list of, or a bunch of decorators that can help us to define such error handlers. So these functions will be called every time we basically land into those issues where we have an expired token, an invalid token, or a missing token. Now, to begin, what we're going to do is to basically define a comment right here. So I'm just going to call this JWT error handlers. And once we have this, we're going to begin by basically defining an error handler for an expired token. So to do that, we're going to basically call our JWT object. So we shall say at JWT dot, in this case we shall call the expired token loader. So this is the decorator that we're going to use, and after defining it, we have to define the function that's going to return the response that's customized in a way that is going to tell us clearly what happened. So to do that, what we're going to do is to define here. So we're going to call this the expired token callback. So this is going to be a callback function that will be called in case we provide an expired token. So this takes in two arguments. It's going to take in the first argument, which is going to be the JWT header, and it will also take in the JWT data. And once we've done that, what we shall do is to go ahead and return the response. So to do that, we shall just come and say return, and in this case we're going to use the JSON function from Flask to return a JSON response. So what I'll do is to go at the top right here, and I'm going to go ahead and import JSON. So I'll come right down here, and all I have to say is return JSON, and then I'll return the appropriate response in case we provide an expired token. So in this case, what I'll do is to provide a message, and what I'll say is that token has expired, and then we shall go ahead and basically provide an error message. So let me say that we shall also provide one error. So just come right here and say error, and then we shall provide our error, which is going to be our token expired. So I'll just basically call this error token expired, and this will be just enough to basically return a response in case our token has expired. Now we're going to also add one for when we have an invalid token. So to do that, what we shall do is to simply do the same thing that we've done right here. So instead of having JWT expired token loader, in this case we're going to say JWT dot, this case is going to be our invalid token loader, and then we shall define our callback function, which is going to be invalid. So let me actually increase the font a little bit so that you guys can see. Now this will be invalid token callback, and what we shall have in here is going to simply be the error, and then we shall return the appropriate response. So what I'll do is to just copy what we have here, and then I'll paste it right here. And then instead of having the token expired, in this case what we're going to say is this is what we shall return in case someone provides a JWT that basically has a wrong signature verification or something that's not actually a JWT. So what shall do is to provide a signature verification failed as the error. So in this case shall say signature verification failed, and in this case shall provide that error. So in this case it's going to be invalid token. So this is when they fail to provide the real valid JWT. So shall say invalid token. And once we've done that, then we shall also go ahead and define one for when they do not actually provide the token. Now to do that, what we shall call is the at JWT dot, sorry for this, is going to be at JWT dot, in this case we're going to have an authorized loader. So that's going to be the decorator, and then the handler function will be missing token callback. And here we shall also have the error. So you should notice that the expired token callback takes in the JWT header, which I actually spelled wrong. This is going to be the JWT header, as well as the data that is contained within the JWT. Well, as for the invalid token callback, we only have the error that's going to be returned, and we also have the missing token callback. It also takes in the error. So there are some that will take in other extra arguments, while some others will only take in the error argument. So what you're going to do is to simply return a response. Now let me fix the indentation right here, and what you shall have here is going to be let's say it's going to be a missing token. So we shall have our request does not contain, so we basically return some friendly message. So here we can say something like request does not, so this is going to be request does not contain a valid token, and this will be just enough. So we can also change the error right here, and we are going to call this authorization required. So we basically want a user to provide a valid token for them to be able to go on with a request. And for each of these errors, what you need to throw is a status code for showing that the user is not actually authorized to access that specific protected endpoint. So what you're going to do is to go ahead and provide those. So what I'll do is to come right here and say comma. So the appropriate status code for returning when a user has provided a token that's expired is going to be the 401 unauthorized status code. So we're going to do the same thing and provide it for the rest of the error handler functions, and we shall be good to go. Now if I save, hoping that our server is running, our server is going to restart. So let's go ahead and test this. So if I go back to my postman right here and try to basically carry out this request without a valid token, so if I send, we're now going to have our message just like we wrote it right here. So that is going to be the one for our request not containing a valid token. So this is going to also return 401 unauthorized. So if we go ahead and basically undo what we did, we can now be able to access our resources just like you see right here. But let's say we did something to our token, or let's say we deleted some of the segments that our token has. So if I go ahead and maybe delete the last segment right here and then try to send, in this case we're now going to see something like signature verification failed, and that's going to be just like how we provided this. Now in case we had an expired token, still when you go ahead and provide that in here within our authorization headers, we shall be able to get an error message that will be what we actually defined right here. And that is how you handle errors that are provided within Flask-JWT Extended. So this can be for the various scenarios of the errors that you may encounter when dealing with providing your JWT to access a specific endpoint. Let us talk about JWT claims. So a JWT claim is basically a payload of the data that is encoded within a JWT. When using a JWT, all you have to send around is basically this specific JWT like the one we have here. So I actually forgot and copied the bearer word. But if you have a JWT just like the one we have right here, what you have is basically a piece of encoded information, and only the person who has the private key will be able to get this information. Now basically what I'm saying is the private key is the JWT secret key. So once you have the JWT secret key, then you can be able to access that data that's encoded within this specific JWT. Now the payload of the data that is basically found within this JWT is what we refer to as the JWT claims. So the JWT claims are basically a JSON object that has whatever data that is being transferred or is being stored within that JWT. Now when you go to the right hand side right here, we basically have the headers of the JWT. So the algorithm for basically encrypting the JWT is the H256, and the type of our token is going to be a JWT, just like you see right here. We have the payload, which are basically the claims, and this is where we have the different information about the JWT. Now in this case, we see that this is not a fresh token, so we have fresh being false, and we have the issued at, so this is basically when that JWT was created. We have that JWT ID. We also see that the type of this JWT is an access token. We see that JWT subject, or the user whom the JWT actually refers to, so this is the identity of the specific JWT. We also have the not valid before, so this is basically the time that's for which the JWT is going to be valid, and we also have the expiration time of this specific token. So these are basically the JWT claims. So how can we be able to get the claims from Flask-JWT-Extended? So what we're going to do is to implement a simple API endpoint that's going to take in a JWT and then specifically just return the JWT claims for that specific token. So to do that, what we're going to do is to go back to our code, and what I'm going to do is to go within our users. So let me actually just say auth, and what I'll do is to just implement that simple API endpoint. So what we're going to do is to just simply say at auth, so we are within the auth blueprint, shall basically call a get method, and in this case shall basically call this who am I, and what this is going to do is simply return the information of a specific JWT. Now this may be helpful in case you basically want to find out the contents of a JWT and so on, but let's first look at what is contained within our JWT. So we're going to define this as basically who am I, and this function is basically going to return the information that's within a JWT. So let's just pass it for now. So when you pass this for now, all we have to do to get the information within a JWT is to first decorate this so that we access it with a valid JWT. So shall go at the top right here and shall say from Flask-JWT-Extended, we're going to import the JWT required decorator. And once we've imported it, we're going to come and decorate our view or our handler function with at. So in this case we're going to say at JWT required, and then after basically accessing this route, we're now going to return the information about a token. So for now, let's just return, so I'll just say return JSONify, and what I'll do in this case is to basically go ahead and provide the message. So let's say message, and then shall basically return the information of a specific JWT. In this case, let's just say message, just to basically make the endpoint work. Now, hoping that our server is running, what we're going to do is to go right to our postman right here, and then I'm going to create a new request. Now this is going to be our who am I request, and what shall be is a request to localhost 5000/auth. So we actually call this endpoint /who am I. So I think that's what we actually called it. So if you go back right here, it's /who am I. So I think it's what we have right here. So if we try to get this right now, we shall basically be told that we do not contain a valid token, so we need to provide one. So what I'll do is to go within our authorization, and then I'll select that we're going to use bearer token auth, and then we shall have to provide our token right here. So have to provide a token, so I'll go where I created the token, I'll copy the token, and then I'll basically come and provide it right here, and then send the request. So now we shall see we actually have an expired token. So let me just create a new token. So with the new token I have right here, what I'm going to do is to copy the token, and then I'll come right here on who am I, and then I'll provide that specific token as our new token. So if we send, we're now going to get our response, which is here. Now for us to get the JWT claims, all we have to do is to call a certain function that's provided with Flask-JWT-Extended, and that's going to be our get JWT function. So the get JWT function is the one that's going to allow us to basically be able to access the JWT claims of a specific JWT. Now this is important in case you are interested in finding out some data that is encoded within the specific JWT. So to begin, what we're going to do is to go within our code. So I'll go to VS Code, and what I'll do is to basically go ahead and import our get JWT function. So once I import that, all I have to do is to come right here. So I'll call claims, I'll create a variable called claims, and then I'll set that to whatever I shall get with calling a get JWT function. So this is basically going to return a dictionary that's going to have the payload of the data that's encoded within our JWT. Now if you want to access that, all you have to do is to basically come right here, and I'll basically say claims, and then I'll provide our claims dictionary right here. So if you go back right here and we try to access this, now this is going to just return the information that's stored within our token. Now keep in mind that there are just scenarios in which you may need to use these JWT claims. Just like, let's say you have stored a user ID or a username of a specific user in your database, you may be able to store their ID and then be able to access it and basically carry out whatever you may want to carry out within your code. Another thing we may do is to try to update our JWTs or add some claims whenever we are creating a JWT. Now we may need to basically do things such as setting administrative JWTs, or basically issuing some JWTs to users who are admins and basically providing them some other functionality. Now we also have a specific decorator that can help us to do exactly that. So to do that, what we're going to do is to head over to where we define our error handlers. So we're going to go to main.py, and just before we define our error handlers, now we're going to go ahead and basically add some additional claims. So those are only going to be added onto our JWTs just in case we are creating that JWT. So this won't be getting the user every time we have to use our JWT, but it will actually add these claims when creating the JWT for that specific user. Now what we want to achieve is when you are creating a JWT for a specific user, let's say the user with an ID of 1, then you may want to maybe add some admin privilege to that specific user. So what you're going to do is to say additional claims, and what we're going to do is to call a specific decorator that's still on our JWT object. So we shall say at JWT dot, so in this case we shall call the additional claims loader, and we shall define the handler function. So this is going to be basically the function that's going to be called to add some extra claims to the JWT of that specific user. So we shall basically say make additional claims, and this will basically take in the identity of that specific user. Sorry for that. So shall basically provide the identity of the user for whom we want to basically add some claims. Now for us to be able to achieve this, sorry for this, so for us to be able to basically get that user, I'm going to close this. I think I've been moving around Windows a little bit. So for us to be able to get the user for whom we actually want to go ahead and add extra claims, what we may do is to use their identity. So the identity is basically going to be the JWT subject, which is what we have right here, which is going to be the username of that specific JWT, or the username that we provide as a subject of that JWT. So what you may want to do is to basically find out if that user is a certain username, and then basically add some claims to the JWT. So let's go ahead and do that. So what you shall do is to come right here and say if identity. So the identity is going to be the username of that specific user. Now our identity in this case is going to be our gendo123. So if we say, let's say if our identity is equal to gendo123, then we can go ahead and basically be able to add some administrative claims to our JWT. So what we're going to do is to basically say if the identity is equal to gender, then what we shall have to do is to go ahead and add those claims to our JWT. So to do that, what we're going to say is we are going to return the claims that we basically want to return on that, or to basically set the value for the claims that we want to add to that JWT for that specific user. So what I'm going to do is to come here and say return, and let's say we're going to basically set a key. So let's say is staff, and then we can say that this user is going to be staff. And we also want to catch a situation in which the identity of a JWT is not actually the name gender. So to handle that, we can basically come right here and then say else we're going to return is staff. So we're going to just come here and say is staff, and then this is going to be false. So if we go ahead and save, if we try to recreate JWTs for the user gender, we shall now see the is staff attribute being set to true. So let's try to do that. Now go back to the route where we created our JWT pair, and I'll try to log in a user with the name gender. So I'll do is to send, and this is going to create a fresh JWT. So I'll copy this JWT, and once I've copied it, I'll then go back to our who am I endpoint right here. So I'm going to remove the JWT that we had, and then I'll simply paste in the new JWT. So if we now send, we're going to see that this JWT is now going to have that specific is staff claim added to it. So that can be important in case you want to add things like, let's say, some added security or some access control within a specific JWT. And the beauty is this only works when you are creating the JWT, so you don't have to basically go ahead and query for the user and then check if they are staff or not, which is actually amazing. Now you can ask when this is actually useful. Now you may have a scenario in which you may want a specific endpoint to be used by a specific user. And in this case, since we've defined our user to be staff, we can now go ahead and use our JWT to basically check if our user is staff and then be able to carry out something. Now we created an endpoint right here, which is basically the one for getting our users. So let's provide a valid token right here. So if I go ahead and provide our fresh token right here, we'll now be able to access all our users, just like you see right here. What if you wanted this action to only be carried out by admin users or staff users? So that's where actually our claims are going to be important. So what you can do is to go ahead and basically restrict that to our users who have the staff attribute being to true. Now if we go back right here within our users, all we have is an endpoint that is protected by JWT required, and then it will just basically go ahead to help us access those users. So if you want to basically add some access control, all we have to do is to just go ahead and basically get the JWT identity. So we can come, actually we want to get a specific JWT claim, so we shall call JWT or get JWT. So once we have that, we can just come right here and say that our claims are going to be equal to get JWT, and we can basically carry out this functionality only and only if the user is a staff user. So what you can do is to say if claims, and in this case we shall basically call .get. So this will basically return our isStaff attribute. So we shall say if claims.isStaff, it's actually isStaff, and in this case we want to check if it is true, then that's when we only want the user to go ahead and execute this code that is right here. So you can just basically call this code only when the staff user is true. And if they are not, then all you have to do is to return an error. So we shall say return JSONify, and in this case we want to basically provide a message, and this will be something like this. Let's say you are not authorized to access this. So let's say also 401 status code will be returned. So let's say we logged in a user such as John Doe or any other user that exists within our application, and we try to make them access this specific endpoint. So if we go back to our Postman right here and we try to basically query our users by using the JWT for the user John Doe, here we see that we can be able to access the users. So let's try to get a user such as, let's say, John Doe, and try to access their list of users, or let's say we try to access this specific endpoint for which we have added some access control. So for us to do that, when you go back to creating a JWT pair, I'm going to change the name from John Doe. So let me actually reduce this so that you guys can see. So what I'm going to do is to change the username from John Doe to John Doe. So I'm just going to come right here and update this to John Doe 123, and then I'll provide the password, which is still the same password. So if I send this, we're going to create our JWT right here, which I'm going to copy. And once I've been able to copy this JWT, I am now going to go where we get all our users and then provide that JWT. So I'm going to go ahead and provide that JWT right here, so that we actually see our access control being implemented. So if I come right here and basically remove that JWT and provide our new JWT, in this case, if we send, we're actually seeing that we are not authorized to access this endpoint, meaning we cannot access it because the JWT of our staff user is not one that's being used. And this is very important as it helps us to authorize certain users to access certain endpoints within our application. When using JWT claims, you may be forced to basically go ahead and get the identity of a user and then using that identity to basically query for that specific user in your database. But to achieve that in a very easy way, Flask-JWT-Extended provides for us what is called automatic user loading. So with automatic user loading, what we have to do is to basically get the JWT and query for the user whose JWT subject is whatever parameter we've provided in there. Now let's look at what we actually mean here. So if I go back to my main.py, I can go ahead and define another loader just like we defined these other loaders. So what I can do is to go ahead and define that as our user lookup loader. So this will allow us to access the currently logged in user, or the user who has that specific JWT, or the user to whom it belongs. So for us to get that, we shall basically say, we shall call this our load user, and what I call is the JWT.user. So this is going to be our user lookup loader. And what this function is going to do is to help us be able to query directly from SQLAlchemy so that we access a specific user object. So to do that, we shall just basically come right here and say lookup, or let's actually just call this the user lookup. So this is going to be our user lookup callback, and this is going to take into things. So it will take in the JWT data, and it will also take in the it will take in the JWT data, and it's also going to take in the specific, to actually take in the JWT header and the JWT data, just like you see right here. So we shall go ahead and provide this excuse me. So we shall provide the JWT headers and the JWT data. So shall provide the JWT data as well. Now if we want to access our user, all we have to do is to get their identity. So the identity is always within the JWT data, which is also a dictionary, which are the actual claims of the JWT. Now to access that, shall get the identity, and then shall get the JWT. Now if we want to access our user, all we have to do is to get their identity. So the identity is always within the JWT data, which is also a dictionary, which are the actual claims of the JWT. Now to access that, shall get the and that will be our JWT data, and in this case we shall get our subject, so the sub part of our JWT, just like we saw right here. If we go back to our who am I endpoint, we saw the sub part, which is basically the JWT subject. Now what we are trying to do is to access that specific part. Once we've been able to access that part, then we shall be able to access the user name of the user who has that specific username. Now all we have to do is to just simply query SQLAlchemy directly, and we shall first of all import our user model. So it means say from models we are going to import our user model, and then we shall go ahead and query for that specific user. And in this case can say user dot query dot filter by, so we're going to look for this user with a specific username. So we shall say username is going to be our identity, and then we shall basically return .1, or we shall return none in case that user does not exist. So using this will allow us to access our user in a very simple way without having to go ahead and query for that specific user, and we shall be able to access that when using a specific object that's provided for us. Now let's look at how we can be able to do that. So if we go back to our auth.py, we're going to modify our endpoint right here so that it doesn't actually have to use our claims to get the currently logged in user, or the user who has that specific JWT, or the user who the JWT belongs to. So for us to be able to get that, we have to import an object from Flask-JWT-Extended, and that's going to be our current user object. So once we have the current user object, it's going to be so easy for us to access the user who that token belongs to. Now for us to be able to do that, we shall remove our claims right here, and once we've been able to do that, we shall basically come and basically create our, so let's just say this is going to be our user details, and what we want to do is to create a dictionary which is going to contain the username of a specific user. So that will be our current user dot username, and then let's say we may also want to return the email, so shall say email is going to be our current user dot email. So if I save, I'm going to pull up the terminal, our server is going to restart. So if we go right here and we try to send, we are actually having our token expired. So let me go ahead and access a new token. I'll copy, and then when I try to go to who am I, I'll provide the specific token within our authorization right here. And then when you try again, still I'm getting expired token. Let me try to create a token. If I come back right here, I'll provide the token right here, and I'll send, and this will actually return the specific user details of the specific user who has that specific JWT. At this point, we've been able to protect different routes by requiring users to only access them when they are provided a valid JWT. We've also looked at how we can use JWT claims that are present within a specific token to allow different users to access different tokens, or to basically control the access to some tokens basing on whether they have some claims or not. In this video, we're going to look at how we can give users access to a token, or access to a route or an endpoint, just in case they have been able to have their token expired. Remember that our JWT access tokens are basically short-lived, and therefore we shall need a mechanism for us to generate new tokens. So we achieve this by using a refresh token. So remember where we created a JWT pair, what we did was to basically go ahead and log in, and what that would do is to go ahead and return for us a token pair. Now let me make this a little bit smaller so that you guys can see. But if you're to notice, we have two tokens. We have an access token and a refresh token. Normally, when you are having an application that requires access to different API endpoints, the access token is one that will give you that access to those specific endpoints. But for security reasons, we are always given a refresh token that is a little bit more short, more long-lived compared to the access token. So the purpose of the refresh token is to allow you to be able to create a new access token just in case the access token you're having is expired. So let's go ahead and look at how we can create a new access token. So to do that, what we're going to do is to head over to our VS Code. Now I'm going to go back to our auth module. So I'll look for our auth.py. And within auth, I'm going to implement another endpoint. So this endpoint, I'm going to basically come down here and I'll call this at app or at auth blueprint dot. In this case, we shall basically say that this is going to be our get method. So let's just call it a get method. And what we shall do in this case is to go ahead and call this our slash refresh endpoint. So what this is going to do is to simply create a new access token or refresh, or let's say refresh our access. So in here, what we shall first do is to decorate this so that we require JWT to access it. And basing on what we did in the previous videos, we're going to use the JWT required decorator. Now what we need to provide in here are some arguments. If you want to basically access this route by providing our refresh token, then all we have to do is to pass in an argument. So this is going to be our refresh, and we shall basically say that this is going to be true. And what this will allow us to do is to only access this endpoint once we provided a token, which is a refresh token. Now remember, when we get our JWT pair, we get an access token as well as a refresh token, but there are two tokens that are different even when we created them. If you haven't watched that video, there's a video, one of the previous videos I made on JWT Claims. Please go ahead and watch it. So once we've got access and we provided a valid refresh token, the next thing is going to be for us to get the identity of that refresh token. Now, the way we get the identity or the JWT subject of a specific JWT is by using the get JWT identity function. In the previous video, we looked at get JWT, which is a function that helps us to get the JWT claims. But just in case we don't want to get the claims or all of the claims, we can be able to use the get JWT identity function to help us be able to access the specific user to whom that token belongs to. Now what I'm going to do is to go and import that. So I'll come right here at the top. Now basically kind of format this so that it can appear on a new line. So what I'll do is to go ahead and put this on a new line, and once I've been able to do that, then I'm going to come right down here. Now what I'm going to do is to come and say that we are also going to import another function. That function is going to be the JWT identity function. And what this will be responsible for is to help us get the username or the subject of that specific JWT. Now once we've been able to do that, I'll come down here, and what we need to do is to get the identity. So the identity is simply the same as the subject that we use when creating the JWT. So I'll say that our identity is going to be a call to the get JWT identity function. And once we have this, we can go ahead and return it. So let me just go ahead and create a simple response. I'll say response JSONify, and in this case what I'll do is to go ahead and basically create a message, and the value of that message will be our identity. Now once I've been able to do that, I'm going to test this endpoint again, hoping that our server is running. So I'll go to our postman right here, and what I'll do is to create a new request, and I'm going to call this request our refresh, or we can actually say regain access. So let's just call this the regain access route. And what this is going to do is simply going to be a GET request. So shall provide our URL, which is going to be localhost 5000/auth/login, or which is actually going to be our /refresh, just like you see right here. So shall say /refresh, and when we try to get this, we shall now be able to only access this when you provide a valid token. So let's go ahead and get our token. So I'm going to go where we created our JWT pair, and what I'll do is to go ahead and copy our refresh token. So copy our refresh token right here. I'll come and regain access. So to do that, I'm going to go to our authorization, and I'll select the authorization type as bearer token. So that means I have to go in here and provide a token. So I'll paste in the token that we've had, and when I send, we now see that we can now get the username who that token was issued to, or the user who is basically the identity of that JWT. So once we've been able to get this user, now all we need to do is to basically create new access tokens for that specific user. Now to create those access tokens, all we're going to do is to make use of our create access token function that's going to take in the identity of that specific user. So when you come right here in our code, we're going to come right here, and all you have to do is to basically create a new token. So to do that, we shall basically say that our access token, or let's actually say that this is going to be our new access token, is going to be equal to call to our create access token function, and inside here we shall have our identity being equal to the identity of that specific user. So once we've been able to get our user, then we can go ahead and try to basically provide JWT in our response. So we can come right here and say that this is going to be our new access token, and here instead of having our identity, we're going to have our new access token. So I'm going to go ahead and save, hoping that our server is still running, and once it's been able to reload, I'll go ahead and try to create a new refresh token, and now we can see that our access token has been created. So I'm going to copy this new access token, and once I copy it, I'll go back to where we had our expired token right here, and then I'll go ahead and try to basically provide a new token, and then try to get the current user, and now we see that the details are returned successfully. What's up everyone, welcome to this video. Now today we're going to conclude this series of videos by looking at how we can log out users. So the way we can achieve this on the server side is by basically revoking the tokens that we give to users. Now this can be access as well as refresh tokens. So what we want is a user not to be able to use their token after logging out. So the way we achieve this, but just depends on your use case, but what we're going to do is to implement token revoking by basically setting up a block list, which is basically sort of like a persistent database table where we're going to basically keep track of these tokens that we have revoked. And for every time we shall use a token, we shall check that database table for if that token is actually saved within our database. Seems simple. Let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to do is to set up that block list that's going to help us to keep track of those tokens that we have revoked. To do that, we're going to create a database model similar to what we created, which is our user account table right here. So to do that, we're going to begin and set up a class. So we're going to call this class token block. So this is actually going to be our token block list, and this is going to be a DB model, so it's going to inherit from db.model. And once we've been able to do this, the next thing is going to be for us to basically provide some attributes onto this specific class. So our first attribute is going to be our ID, and this ID is going to be a column, so shall say db.column, and we shall define the type of this column. So it's going to be an integer, so we shall say db.integer. And the next thing is going to be for us to basically provide it as the primary key. So we shall set the primary key attribute to true. So this will basically make sure that this is our primary key. The next thing we shall keep track of is going to be the JTI, which is going to be the unique identifier for each JWT that we shall have. Now this unique identifier is going to be universally unique, meaning that each JWT will have a unique ID for every JWT that will be created. So let's go ahead and keep track of this. So we can say that our JTI is going to be a db.column, and in this case shall have a db.string. Now since this is a UUID, you can still feel free to use the UUID field if you're using a database such as Postgres, but I'm using SQLite, which does not fully support that, so I have to basically go ahead and store them as strings. So I'll basically say that this is not going to be nullable, so I'll set a nullable constraint right here. I'll say nullable is going to be equal to false. Another thing I may need is going to be the time at which we basically revoke the tokens. So for us to achieve that, we have to basically set up a column which is going to be created at, and this is going to be storing a timestamp. So shall say db.column, and in this case we shall say db.datetime. So this will be our datetime field, and this datetime field will have a default. So I'll say that our default is going to be equal to our datetime.utc now. Now if you're wondering where I got this from, I got it from basically importing datetime. So I'll say from datetime import the datetime class, and then we shall go ahead and basically set it up as a default right here. So now that we've been able to do this, the next thing is going to be for us to basically create a simple string representation of every object that will be formed out of this class. So we do that in SQLAlchemy. We define the dunder repre method. So shall say dunder repre, and in this case shall say self, and all we need to do is to just simply return the string representation of that object. Now in this case we may come and say that this is going to be our token, and just in case we want to return the JTI, we shall say return JTI, then the JTI. So this will be self.jti. So once we've been able to create this specific field, the next thing we have to do is to go ahead and create our database for this token block list. So what I'm going to do is to go within my terminal. I have some stuff open here, so what I'll do is to first get out of the current terminal, and to create our database I'm going to be using a very hacky way to create the database, but you can still feel free to use a tool such as Flask-Migrate to basically go ahead and help you run migrations to basically change the way your database structure is. So I'll begin by first of all going to our Flask shell. So I'll come right here and say Flask shell, and within our Flask shell I'll first of all import the database model for which we want to create in the database. So to do that I'll say from the models.py file right here, we are going to go ahead and import our token. So we called it our token block list. It's going to be our token block list with a small l. And once we've been able to import it, we have access to our DB object already. So we can go ahead and run db.create_all. And this will go ahead and create our database, but it seems like our database is not yet created. So let me try to refresh, or let me try to close the database and try to open it once again. So seems like our database has not been created. Let me try to recreate the database once again with db.create_all. And now I think this will go ahead and create our database. So if you go right here and we try to refresh, shall now see that our token block list table exists. So the reason as to why we've created this token block list table is to be able to help us to keep track of tokens that have been revoked. So these tokens will not be able to be in use once they have been revoked, meaning anyone who accesses these tokens will not be able to carry out any other requests. And for us to achieve that, Flask-JWT Extended still provides for us handlers to help us be able to achieve this. So for us to be able to check for tokens before every request, we're going to go ahead and implement a handler using some decorators that have been provided for us by Flask-JWT Extended. So what I'll do is to go where we actually went ahead and defined all that stuff. So we have all that stuff defined where we have a create app function or our application factory. So what we want to do is to go ahead and basically use our JWT object. So we shall say that our JWT object, which is going to be our JWT, we can go ahead and basically call our token block list. So this will be our token in block list callback, and our token in block list, our token in block list callback will be the function that will be called to basically return a response in case we have that JWT blocked or revoked. And our loader is going to be the specific decorator that's going to help us to be able to basically go ahead and help us to check if that JWT is revoked. So what we need to call in this case is going to be the token in block list loader. And what this is going to do is to basically take in a function or the handler, which is basically going to be the function to help us check if our JWT is revoked, or basically do that. So we shall basically come here and define our token in block list. So in this case, we're going to say we're going to check our token block list. So we are now going to define this function as token block list, and actually want to call this token in block list. So this will be our token in block list callback, which is simply going to be a callback function that will be called to basically check if this JWT is revoked. So just like we did in these past examples when we are doing error handling, what we're going to do is to also require the JWT headers and the JWT data. And from this JWT data, we shall have access to the JWT identifier, or what we call the JTI. So once we get the JTI, then we'll have to query for our database to check if our token actually exists within our database. So for us to do that, we shall have to still provide those two specific attributes. So the first one is going to be our JWT header, and the second one is going to be the JWT data. Now the JWT data is going to be the specific claims that the token is going to have. If you haven't known about claims, please go ahead and check my previous video on JWT claims. So JWT claims are just basically going to give us the information that's hidden or encoded within our JWT. So once we've been able to get the access to this JWT data, what we shall have to do is to get the JTI. So the JWT data is simply going to be a dictionary containing the information about our token. So once you get the JTI, what we want to do is to access the JWT data. So this JWT data will have a JTI. If you looked at the claims video, you can understand how this comes about. So we shall access the key of JTI, and this will be basically enough to give us our JTI for that specific JWT. Now once we've been able to get the JTI, the next thing is going to be for us to query for our token. So for us to do that is basically going ahead and basically checking if it exists. So we're going to create a variable called token, and this token is going to be equal to, so in this case what we're going to do is to basically query for our token block list to check if JWT with our JTI actually exists. So I'll have to go ahead and first of all import our token block list model. So I'll come, and after importing our user model, I'll import our token block list. So I'll go down right where we have our token, and then what I have to do is to just come right here and say token block list dot query. So you can use the query API, or what you can do is to actually go ahead and use db.session dot, in this case I'll say query, and what I'll need to do is to basically provide the table or the class or the model that I want to go ahead and query for. Now if you're wondering why I'm doing this, I'm trying to use the scalars that come with SQLAlchemy 2.0 to basically go ahead and check if this token exists. So for me to be able to do that, I'll pass in the token block list class, and in this case what I want to do is to go ahead and basically check if the JWT exists in here. So what I'll do is to come right here and say dot filter. In this case I'll say filter, and what I want to do is to basically pass in a criterion. Now I may have something like, let's say, the token block list dot, in this case I want to check if the JTI is very similar, or is actually the JTI that we get from our JWT data right here. So I can come and say if it's equal to the JTI, then in this case what we want to do is to basically return that specific JTI. So for me to return true or false if it exists, then I'll have to say dot scalar, and what this is going to do is to go ahead and basically dot scalar will return that specific object. If we say dot scalars, so this is actually going to be dot, and if we have scalar subquery, then we can have a scalar. Then what we want to do is to say dot scalar. So what this is going to do is to return the first element of the result, or none if no rows are present for that specific query. So this is SQLAlchemy 2.0 style of querying. If you haven't known how this works, you can check out my video on SQLAlchemy 2.0, where I basically went through how to basically query using this style of querying. Now, once we've been able to get this token, what we need to do is to basically return a statement and basically be able to tell users that a certain token has been revoked. So to do that, what we need to do is to go ahead and return, and what we want to do is to return token is not none. So what this means is when we query for the token and it exists, then token is not none will be true, meaning that this will actually throw an error telling us that, you know what, this token has been revoked. And in case this token is none, then it's going to return false, meaning you can go ahead and basically carry out any request that you may carry out with a specific JWT. Now, if you've not understood this, what we're actually doing is getting a JWT, checking for its JTI, and then checking if that JTI exists within our database. If that JTI exists within our database, then what we're going to do is to return an error showing the user that that specific JWT they are trying to use has been revoked, and therefore they will not be able to use it in any request. I hope you've understood that. So once we've been able to query for that, then we're going to basically return token is not none. If it's none, then we shall be able to move on carrying out the request. If it's not none, then we shall throw an error showing a user that the token has been revoked. And that's how revoking actually works. So this callback right here is going to be called for every request that we shall carry out using a specific token. So once we've been able to achieve this, then the next thing is going to be to basically go ahead and basically log out a user. So to log out a user, what we're going to do is to basically add a token to our blacklist or our block list. I actually mistake this too, but it's going to be our token block list. And the way we're going to achieve that is by implementing a route. So I'll head over to our auth endpoint or our auth URLs right here. And what I have to do is to create a route. Now this is going to be at auth blueprint dot And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say, let me just say that this is going to be get. So let me call it a get endpoint, and it's going to be our /logout. Now what we're going to do is to define the handler function, and this is going to be our logout user. So our logout user is basically going to go ahead and basically be a protected route, so shall need a JWT to access this. Now in this case, what we're going to do is to come and say that shall require JWT to access this endpoint. So once we've been able to access this endpoint, the next thing is going to be for us to get the JWT claims of that specific JWT. And the way we get that is by basically coming right here and using the get JWT function. So once we've been able to get the JWT, all we need to do is to get the JTI of that specific JWT. And the way we do that is by basically coming and saying that the JTI will be equal to JWT, and then since that will be a dictionary, then we shall access it by the key of JTI. And once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to save that JWT to our block list. So to do that, what we're going to do is to go ahead and basically import our token block list model. So shall say import our token block list, and then at the bottom right here, what we're going to do is to go ahead and save. So we shall need to create a new token block list object. So to do that, shall say token block list, and in this case shall create our token block list. So what we can do is to go ahead and basically create this as our token, or let's say our token block list object, and this is going to be a new token block list object. But what we need in this case is our JTI, so we shall provide our JTI, and our JTI is going to be equal to our JTI. Now for that date at which we create this token is already automatically created for us, and also the primary key is going to be automatically generated for us. Therefore, if we just provide our JWT or our JTI, it will still work the same. To make this more interesting, what you can do is to go ahead and define a method on our models that's simply going to go ahead and save our token or our JTI. So to implement this, we shall basically create a save method, and this is going to take in self. Now shall use our DB instance or our DB object to basically add that to our session. So shall say db.session.add, and then we shall add that object, and then we shall finally commit it to our database by basically saying db.session.commit, and that will be enough for us to basically save those changes to our database. Now if we head over here in our auth, all we need to do is to go ahead and call token blacklist dot save, and that will be just enough to go ahead and save that specific token blacklist object or token blacklist object. So once we've been able to do this, then we shall return a message or a response. So we shall just come right here and say return JSONify, and in this case we want to basically return a message, and this message is going to be one for logged out successfully. So once we've been able to do this, we can also return a 200 status code, and that will be just enough to basically show how we've logged out a user. Now let us test this endpoint out. So what I'm going to do is to go and check if our server is running, of which it is. So I'll head over to our postman right here, and in our postman I'm going to create a new request, and sorry for that, this is going to be our add request, and in this case I'm going to call this log out user, and I'll go ahead and basically call it a get request, just like I've implemented it right here. So this will be on our localhost 5000/auth, and in this case we shall have our logout. So once we have this, then the next thing is going to be for us to go ahead and log out our user. Now all we need is to access this endpoint with our authorization. So we are using bearer token authentication. So once we have our token, which is this specific token, we can go ahead and send it. Now this token has expired. Now let's go ahead and try to regain a token using our refresh token that we provide in this endpoint. If we get this token, I'm going to go ahead and copy it, and then I'll provide it within our request. So I'll go ahead and replace the current token that we have right here with our new token, and then send. We shall now see that our user is logged out successfully. Now let us try to use this revoked token to access an endpoint that is protected. So if you watch the previous videos, we implemented a route for getting a paginated list of all users that are present within our API or within our database. So for us to do that, I'll go right here. So here I just provided it in the authorization, but it's still the same thing if I do authorization and then bearer token authorization. So what I'll do is to come right here and I'll remove this token, and then I'll provide the token that has been revoked. So if we send, we're now going to see that our token has been revoked, meaning that we cannot access any other protected endpoint using that specific token, because at this point it has been revoked and it is not able to access other API endpoints. Now this is just for access tokens. We're going to look at how we basically also restrict refresh tokens. Now that we've been able to log out users by revoking their tokens, in this video we're going to look at how we can basically go ahead and also restrict refresh tokens from having to access endpoints once a user is logged out. Now in our logout endpoint right here, all we are doing is to basically provide an access token and then adding it to our block list. What if we went ahead and basically did the same thing for our refresh tokens? So for us to be able to do that for our refresh tokens, the thing we're going to do is to actually go ahead and basically change our endpoint so that it accepts any type of JWT, be it refresh or access. And when we get this, then what we shall do is to just simply go ahead and add it to our block list. So first, to achieve this, we are going to just come and modify our endpoint by modifying our JWT required decorator. And what we shall need in this case is going to be the verify type attribute or argument to that specific decorator. So inside here, we are going to provide a boolean, and when this is true, then we shall basically be only forced to access this route with only refresh tokens. And if we leave it to false, then that means that we are going to be able to provide both access and refresh tokens, and those tokens will be added onto our block list. So what we're going to do is to come right here and say false, and that will be very helpful as it's going to allow us to provide both access and refresh tokens to this endpoint. Now another thing we may do is to access the type of the token within our JWT claims. Now if you watch the previous video, all we do is to go ahead and access the JWT. So in this case we got the JTI. What we want to do is to get the token type. So I'm going to call this the token type, and the token type will simply be the JWT claim with the key of type, and this will basically return access or refresh depending on the type of token that we have provided. Now one thing we may do is to also go ahead and change our message. So in this case, what we're going to do is to say so I'm just going to come right here and provide an F string, and what we shall do is to say that we are going to provide the token type. So shall just basically come and say the token type is going to be revoked. So shall just come right here and say token access token or refresh token revoked successfully. So this is the message that we're going to return for a successful login. So once we've been able to do this, I'm going to go ahead and save, and let's go ahead and try to log out a user again. So I'll open up my Postman. So right here in our Postman, what we're going to do is to go ahead and try to log out a user. So I'm going to get an access token, So if I try to basically, so right now we cannot be able to load the user John Doe. I think that user does not exist. So if we went ahead and created a new user, so the user is created. If we go ahead and use this same user to log in to access a token, go to the body, and then we shall provide the user details just like you see right here. We send this, we shall get an access and a refresh token. Now our goal is to go ahead and basically use this to log out. So I'll copy the access token right here and then go to log out. So in the headers or our authorization, I'll go ahead and provide this token. So I'll basically replace the token that we have here with a new token. And here we shall see that our access token has been revoked successfully. If you try to use this to access an endpoint, so let's go to where we get all our users. Now I'm going to change this authorization and make it use our new token. So I'll just come right here and then I'll say that we shall provide our new token. So if we try to basically access that token, we shall see that that token has been revoked. Now let us try to also use our revoked refresh token to access a new token. If you go where we created our JWT pair, I'm going to copy our refresh token just like you see right here, and I'll basically go ahead and copy it. And when I go where we have our regain access, then I'll go ahead and provide that access token right here. So for now, we can be able to get a new access token, but if we go ahead and log out our user by basically providing that refresh token, we're now going to see that that refresh token has been revoked. Therefore, if we go back where we use that same access refresh token to get a new access token, we cannot be able to use that refresh token. So in this series of videos, we basically looked at how we can implement JWT authentication and authorizations using the Flask-JWT Extended library. We've looked at how we can basically create user accounts. We can log in users by helping them get JWT pairs. We've looked at things such as regaining access with refresh tokens, and also we've looked at things such as logging out users by enabling us to revoke their tokens. If you've liked this video, please leave a like and don't forget to share it with people who may find it useful. I've also created a Patreon account where I will be creating some videos that are on request by you members of my YouTube channel. Feel free to leave a comment down in the comment section about how you feel, and I hope to meet you in the next series of videos. Bye.